Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Latter-day Disciples podcast. I'm so grateful today to be joined by Marianne Paventy. Marianne is a lifelong seeker of truth. She has written poetry since she was a child and has recently shared it with a wider audience in her book, Walk in Wisdom's Paths, Thoughts and Poems Written to Uphold Our Divine Mother. She attended BYU after high school, where she studied fitness and wellness, and she is now continuing her education through BYU studying psychology. Marianne is also in the process of certification with Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach in their Mindfulness Meditation Teacher training program through Sounds True, the Awareness Training Institute, and the University of California at Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. Marianne enjoys the beautiful mountains and skies of Idaho, where she and her husband, Tim, are the parents of 4 children. Marianne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I've really been looking forward to this.
Absolutely. Well, I was introduced to you through our mutual friend, Dave Butler, and he knows the best people. I mean, he knows everything, right? Like he's just one of the best humans. So I'm so grateful that he introduced us. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself and your story, and particularly your journey to seeking and finding, to the degree that you have, our Heavenly Mother, and how that's been important for you in your discipleship?
Yes, I would love to. Um, I feel like most of my life, or all my life, I have felt like a seeker. I think that started with my mother.
Mm.
She is definitely a seeker, and she was always so curious, and she loved to learn about anything and everything, and still does. And so I think I just kind of grew up with kind of that open-minded approach to learning, which I've been really, really grateful for. I've always loved reading. I've always loved learning. I've always loved seeking. I feel like it's just always been a part of me. In relation to Heavenly Mother, I feel like she's always been a part of me. Even as a young child, I feel like I was always just so excited anytime any little hint of her was ever even mentioned. I have one of my poems is about the hymn, "Oh, My Father," being my favorite, because every time I would get to sing that, I would just feel this thrill, just getting to say those words. I have a mother there. I was just always so happy and excited to be able to vocalize that, because I would think about her a lot, but would never really vocalize anything. Um, so fast forward lots of years, and this was maybe, it's hard for me to remember the timeline exactly. But maybe 6-ish years ago, I was talking to my daughter, and she was asking me, she was saying, "Mom," I was just, up in her room saying goodnight to her one night. And she's saying, "Mom, wouldn't it be so amazing to see Jesus?" And I thought, well, yeah, that would be amazing. I would love that. And I walk out of her bedroom, and I was thinking about that question. And I thought, yeah, that would really be cool to see Jesus, but I really want to see my mother. And it was just like this desire that just, I can't even describe it. It's like it bubbled up from the depths of my soul, and just this flame just kind of burst in my heart. And I realized, like, oh, I have such a burning desire to know my mother. And it just hit me. So from that point, I felt so compelled, and so, like, at times I felt like there was somebody behind me with their hands on my back, like pushing me to, go learn this or go study this or do this. And so I felt very specifically guided, and led to different things that helped me to learn more about her. Like you said, I'm in a school for mindfulness and meditation, and that has been a big part of that also. So meditating more, making more time to be still and quiet has gone hand in hand with my journey to come to know the mother, because I feel like that's kind of her domain, that stillness. That's oftentimes where she can be found, I think. So, reading everything I could, doing online classes, listening to podcasts, reading articles. I have this big file of all these things I collected, of all the different, resources that I found. And so she just became a huge part of everything. And as I think you can probably relate to, once you see her, you can't unsee her.
Mm.
It's just not possible, right? So she had just become a part of everything for me. As far as poetry goes, like you read in my bio, I've written poetry my whole life, but it was always kind of just for fun. I've given it to my husband or to my parents or, just for myself. I've never really tried to do anything with it. And I was sitting, it's like one of those moments that you'll never forget, right? I was sitting in my car on a busy street on Eagle Road, where I live in Eagle, Idaho. And, just kind of sitting there stuck in traffic. I was listening to a podcast that was talking about Heavenly Mother. And they were saying, whatever you have, we need it, whether it's music, whether it's writing, whether it's poetry, whatever you have, we need that. And I had this distinct impression, you need to write a poetry book. And I'm sitting there in my car, and I'm like, really? Are you sure? Like, I don't know about that. Just thinking that's kind of strange. And so I was just kind of, hesitating, and it came again just as strongly, you need to write a poetry book. And so I just kind of mentally agreed, like, okay, I'll do it. And it was almost like felt like I had like signed this heart contract. It was like it was presented to me, I agreed to it. And then it was just like the floodgates were opened, and just this rush came for like 3 days of all these poems. There were a couple of poems that I had written beforehand, like a couple after I had been in Egypt, which was a big part of my journey in finding her, was going to Egypt. But yeah, for the next 3 days, I was just writing and writing and writing. My back was hurting during that time, and I was getting massage, and, things were coming, and I had to stop her. I'm like, could you hand me my phone? I need to write this down. I need to put this in my phone before I forget. So the ideas and the words and the phrases were just coming and coming and coming. So the majority of this book was written in those 3 days.
Mm.
And
Wow.
yeah,
That's intense.
it was intense. And I just felt her so strongly. And as far as getting it published, I always just felt like the right thing was going to happen. I didn't feel a lot of pressure to get it published. I was like, if it happens, great. If it doesn't, that's fine. So the publication process just kind of happened, and it's just been kind of a very surreal journey. Like holding this book in my hands still doesn't feel real to me.
Yeah,
It just kind of feels like I'm playing pretend a little bit, but
I get
yeah.
that. I think I would say something really similar about my process for the book that I was writing, that like it wasn't really mine. It just came, and it came in a flood, and it was a lot, and then it's there, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, you wrote a book." And I'm like, "I think the book wrote me, actually." Like,
Yeah.
I don't think I wrote that book.
Yeah. Yep. I completely relate to that. And in fact, there's been so many times where little phrases or lines from one of the poems have come back to me since I've written that as an answer to a prayer.
Hmm.
So it's just been just such a wonderful, amazing gift. It's just really
That's
been a gift.
That's wonderful. I'd love to talk about that for a little bit. More broadly, and speaking to our audience of men and women who perhaps are feeling a similar call to do a work to support and uphold the Divine Mother, as you say. Uh, from my perspective and what I've been witnessing is that there is a divine feminine resurgence globally right now. It's not just in the church, it's not just in new age, spirituality, it's everywhere. And I see it in so many different sects. There's so many people that are awakening to this. Do you have any thoughts, observations, why that's happening, what you've witnessed, and how we can maybe interpret what we're seeing as this restoration that's been going on?
Yeah, I've actually thought about that a lot because I felt the same thing and I've noticed the same thing. And I think kind of what I've landed on is before things are fully restored, we believe in our faith tradition that we have ongoing restoration, right? So I really believe that before things can be fully restored, that hearts need to be prepared. And so I feel like really worldwide hearts are being prepared to more fully receive the divine feminine.
Mm.
I think I kind of started my journey really hoping and waiting and being disappointed and waiting and hoping and being disappointed for her to be just kind of handed to me. That's one of my very first poem in there is like me talking about just kind of this waiting and feeling always disappointed. Like, when is somebody just going to hand her to me and make this easy?
Mm-hmm.
But nothing that's ever worthwhile is ever easy. So I feel like her being the most precious above all, I think it's going to take internal work for a lot of people. And so I just kind of feel like the world is waking up. And
Yeah.
I feel like the world is, I have one of my poems is I say one drop at a time, our souls hear the call. And I kind of feel like that's how it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
That hearts are being opened and eyes are being opened and minds are being opened to kind of lay the foundation and prepare the garden
Mm-hmm.
so the trees can flourish, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's kind of what's happening is that hearts are being prepared. So
Mm.
as things are more fully restored, there's going to be more people who are ready to receive and accept
Yeah.
this more complete and full picture of truth.
Yeah. So beautiful. Well, and she is a veil in and of herself. And if you aren't wanting that veil to part, if you're not interested in it, if you reject it, then you don't get what's on the other side. And so I almost feel like there's a little bit of a challenge. Maybe a better word is an invitation that many of us are feeling in our hearts and many people aren't. And I think that that's okay. It's okay if not everyone is feeling this drive that we are. But if we are feeling it, then that's an invitation. And that's something that we should lean into, really being intentionally studying and seeking and asking questions, not shying away from it. What would you say to someone who maybe is feeling this call, but also has some cognitive dissonance because of maybe some of the traditional ways that we've been taught or that we think, or false things that have been handed down? How do you reconcile? Did you experience any cognitive dissonance, and what counsel would you have for someone who's kind of feeling a conflict within themselves between pursuing and understanding the divine feminine and staying inside the box as we are taught to?
Yes, I have experienced it. And I think most people probably will on their journey at some point to find her. And actually part of my journey kind of goes with what you were saying, is that not everybody is going to feel as strongly as I do. And it's okay. So a big part of my journey has been to allow people to be where they are and to not be angry at them because they're not where I am.
Yeah.
And not to say like I'm the example of where to be. I just mean we're all in different places in our journey and it's okay. And just like I would hope that they could let me be where I am, I want to let them be where they are, because it's all, from a mindfulness perspective, you're exactly where you need to be for what you need at this time in your life. So I really believe that. And I think God treats us that way. I think that they let us be where we are. I think they invite, I think they offer, I think they, their arms are always outstretched, but they're never going to force us and they're never going to be mad at us if we're not ready or if we don't quite see those arms outstretched yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I was talking to someone and had kind of this aha moment. And he was saying from his perspective, and he was kind of speaking about his own journey and his own work, but he was saying, I've realized all I can do is offer. And then I just have to let go of the rest. And so that's kind of become a bit of a personal mantra for me, whether it's with teaching mindfulness and meditation or whether it's with talking about the mother and, putting this book out there. All I can do is offer, and then I just have to let go of the rest. So I think that's kind of the first part of what I would say about all that is just let people be where they are, because part of that dissonance can come from you feeling so strongly And then you encounter people who don't.
Mm.
And it can be really painful. And so I think a big part of being in a church community or a faith community is to let people be where they are and to love them where they are, because God loves us where we are.
Mm.
They don't wait until we get to a certain place before they love us. They love us exactly where we are right now in this moment. So I think the more that we can do that with each other, the more we can be like them.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
beautiful. I wanted to point out just so many of the things that you have been saying that define the divine feminine. And perhaps that's why maybe it sounds like a foreign gospel to us in some ways, because we've been taught very much the masculine side of God. And when you introduce the feminine, it's always an introduction for them both to balance with each other. It's not meant to demean or squish or get rid of the masculine side. We want both. And you talk about that in your poetry so beautifully, that we want a sense of balance. And when you do that, when you introduce the feminine, it feels so different because it takes the order and the structure and the law of the masculine and it circumscribes it into this law of love that you're talking about. So some of the words that and themes that we've been talking about already that define Heavenly Mother are variability, right? That we're each at our own place and that God can meet us exactly where we are and that they love us exactly where they are. I love that you use this horizontal motion with your hands because I do that when talking about the feminine side of God. The masculine is this vertical motion. It's this almost hierarchical. And then the feminine is this horizontal motion. And what happens when you introduce the horizontal motion, the feminine, what you're doing is you're making room for everybody. You're building a common identity that we're all children of God. We're all worthy of love. We're all divine. There's a unity in that. And it's universal, that no one is exempt. That's how priestesshood works. As opposed to the priesthood, which is an order that you have to meet certain qualifications to come into as a man. Women, every single woman is a part of the priestesshood. And so that's so important to recognize. And then a couple of the motions of the divine feminine that I love that you shared is offer, right? That we can just invite, that she presents, and then we get to decide. And the result of that, we surrender. We let it go. We understand that either way is fine. And then another word that I love that you've used as well is allow, that we allow people to make their choice. We allow people to have their agency to seek or not seek. It's fine. And like God is so much bigger. I think we get really caught on an image of God as our parents who are very fallen. And speaking as a parent, I am horribly inept at being a parent. And sometimes we ascribe our characteristics as fallen human parents to God themselves. And they're just so much bigger than that. They're so much better than that, to the degree that they are perfectly happy to allow us to have our agency and make our choices. And yes, there will be consequences, and that's all taken care of. We're all in our process of learning. So anyway, I just wanted to point out some of those things that you mentioned that I think are really beautiful definitions of what the divine feminine is and how it changes our view of God when we introduce her. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, they love us where we are. And I think a lot of times in the church we've grown up with kind of this cultural belief. I don't think it's doctrinal, I think it's cultural, this belief that we somehow have to earn
Mm,
love. But I just think that's a lie.
yeah.
Just a blatant lie. I think they love us exactly where we are and
Mm,
they're ready to accept us
yeah.
exactly where we are. And
Yeah.
then that love is motivating and that love is elevating. So I think that's so important to realize that in meeting us where we are, they love us exactly as we
Yeah.
are right now.
Yeah. I think we've ascribed a spirit of fear to the truth that God is unconditional love. And I think that our logic behind that is straight from the adversary. Is there seems to be this cultural, I agree with you. It's not doctrinal, it's cultural. This cultural belief that if I think that God is unconditional love, then that means I'm not ever going to be motivated to change. That I'm only motivated to change and improve and transform if I fear God. And if God's disapproval and disappointment in me is just so heavy. That's the only thing that will make me ever change. And I think that there are certain historical figures that would make the argument that it is better to be feared than loved. I think of Machiavelli, who was the Hitler of Italy, certainly ascribed to that theory. And so it's really quite satanic to suggest that God is anything less than unconditional love. And when we realize that, and when we own that God is love completely, the complete perfect definition of unfathomable love, unavoidable love, that is far more motivating if you really understand and embrace that than fear of God or fear of God's disapproval is. So thank you for sharing that. And Heavenly Mother is key to that. Can you talk about the phrase love of God? I didn't plan to ask you this, but I feel inspired that maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Well, I think talking about this fear versus love, it's kind of become a barometer for me,
Mm,
right? Kind of a gauge for myself. Am I leaning more towards fear or am I leaning more towards love right now? And so when I can pause and think about, okay, what's driving me right now? Is it more fear-based or is it more love-based? Um, I think God is love.
mm,
So I think if we are to become like her, like the love of God, then I think we also are to learn to how to become love. Not just to learn how to love, but how to actually become love.
mm,
So that's something that I've thought about a lot. Um, I think the word love is so multifaceted. I think it is a title. I think it is a verb. I think it describes her. I think it describes the masculine aspect as well. Um, but when I think of love, I think love is the driving force, the energy behind everything that God does.
mhm,
I think that love is a tangible force. I think love is the power that created the world, the power that created us. I think love is an extension of God.
yeah.
So I think as we, in this human existence, there's so many factors that pull us away from love. And so I kind of have just come to realize, so love is actually what started me on this whole journey. Through this whole journey, there's been specific things that I've been led to. And it all kind of started with this phrase that came to my mind that love is always the answer. And so that's been something that I have kept coming back to. And I've always been surprised every time that I keep getting led back to love again and again and again. And I think, like I said, it's because I think God literally is love. So the more we can turn to love and let the power of God, let this love change us. You think about cell turnover and how cells change and become new. I think that love does that for us. I think
Mhm,
that it changes us. I think that it changes us mentally and spiritually and physically too, if we allow it to. I think
mhm.
that love is this force that is the catalyst behind everything that's good and beautiful and of God.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, I wanted to go to one of the other things that you mentioned earlier on, where you talked about meditation and stillness as Heavenly Mother's domain. And a little bit after that point, you made the point that there's a lot of inner work that is required for us to be able to, I think, open our hearts to her and then begin to receive um, from both of our heavenly parents. Could you talk a little bit more about those ideas, those themes, how they play into discovering the divine feminine, and especially perhaps that idea of internal work? Because I do think that Heavenly Mother, uh, she is a big proponent and in many ways, I feel like she requires us to be sanctified. And she is a driving force behind that. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think this has been a big part of my journey, really, this inner work. Because I think I started this whole process kind of looking for her externally. And the process for me that's ongoing is realizing more and more that she's within. This inner work is so necessary.
Mm.
You know, I just think that she is not afraid to get her hands dirty. I think that she is in the muck and the dirt with us. You think of the metaphor and this powerful symbol of the tree, right? Which is associated with the mother throughout many ancient faith traditions and histories, right? She's the tree of life. Thinking of these roots reaching into this deep, dark soil, to me, that is kind of this inner work that needs to be done. It is kind of reaching into the shadows of ourselves that we try to ignore or that we're afraid of or that we don't understand. And again, allowing love to shine a light on those places. And I think, like I said, I think, at least in my experience, she has been in the work with me. She helps to shine that light on those places that I'm afraid of, or those places that have caused suffering, or those places that have been painful, the places that I've pushed away. If we allow her to and can trust in her love, then she will illuminate those places and they can become places of immense growth and learning and sanctification, like you mentioned.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I think that it's consistent with those ancient traditions that one of the roles of the mother is exactly as you expressed, that she helps us face the shadows inside of us. And that's real work. I think going back to some cultural things that kind of get ingrained in us, we're pretty used to doing the external things, right? To doing the checklist items. And it's not that there's no value in those things, but we get caught on them and we don't allow them to change our hearts the way that they have the potential to. And Heavenly Mother really helps us dig deep into our hearts, as you were saying, into our wounds, our traumas, our fears, the things inside of us that are preventing us from accepting that perfect love. And she goes there with us. Do you have any, a lot of this is really sacred, so it's okay if you don't have any experiences, but do you have any experiences that kind of illuminate those principles that you wouldn't mind sharing?
Um, yeah, a lot of them are fairly personal. Um, but I think this is one of the ways that where mindfulness has been woven in for me and
Mm-hmm.
meditation. Um, because I've learned principles that have kind of helped me to be able to do this. And one of those, I think growing up my whole life, I was a pro at pushing things away.
Mm-hmm.
I was really good at pushing my feelings away and locking them up and pretending that they weren't there. And so I had done that for so long, not wanting to deal with the hard things, not wanting to deal with the pain and the suffering, that I think it somewhat started to numb everything for me. Because you can't pick and choose. You can't bury and push away all the hard and expect to fully feel the good. It's just not possible. When you start to numb yourself, you're going to numb yourself to all of it. And so part of that ended up being a catalyst for me. I just started to feel kind of numb and I felt like I wasn't feeling anything as fully as I wanted to. So I knew that something needed to change. And in the mindfulness world, it's approached so differently where, we tend to view things as good and bad. But in the mindfulness world, it's all just an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And You try not to identify with any of it and not to take it as, this is a part of who I am, but this is just a part of my experience. And what can I learn from it? And can I be curious about it? And can I allow it to be there? Where instead of pushing it away, pushing it away, pushing it away, you breathe and you just allow it to be there. And you even lean into it, which feels counterintuitive because you might think, oh my gosh, if I lean into this, it's going to destroy me, right? It's just too powerful. If I lean into this, I'm just gonna drown, right? But it really is the opposite. And I say this in the classes that I teach, you just have to try it and then you'll believe it. Because it sounds kind of scary, right? You're feeling something or remembering something or dealing with something that's really painful and you just feel like it's going to overtake you. But if you can just breathe and give it space to be there and see it for what it is and not be afraid to name, okay, I see you and it's okay to allow it and let it be there. And what can I learn from this? And, life is our greatest teacher if we allow it to be. So I think just that space of breathing and opening, that gives that space for the mother to rush in and just fill all that space with light and love and goodness. So for me, a big part of my journey has been letting go of the fear of feeling all the hard and the difficult and allowing it to be there, seeing it for what it is, and letting myself learn from it rather than be afraid of it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. I think it kind of plays on this idea of something that I learned that's called your witness self, where basically you see your life and you zoom out and almost take a step into our spiritual side, right? That's not so encumbered about with the emotions and the weight of this physical body, right? And all of the problems that come with it, all of the blessings too. And you step into that space and just witness, just see. And in removing that emotional side of it, it's really beautiful. And you gain a self-respect to see, oh, like I'm going through really hard things right now and I'm doing it. Like, yeah, I'm kind of a mess and it's not easy, but I'm doing this and I'm learning from it. And I think that it gives us maybe a more true perspective of how God sees us, to allow in that grace that you were talking about, that they come in and they help us through some of those hard things. In my journey, I've been led to meditation as well. I'm not very good at it. And I'm sure you hear that a lot. And I know that practice really does matter. Because there have been times when I've been more consistent about practicing and I feel like I've gotten better at it. But can we talk about meditation as a tool, why it's so important for us in our spiritual journey, generally speaking? And then what are some tips and practical things that we can apply to begin practicing it? Because I really do think it's important for us to have these skills.
So can I ask you a question to
Go
start?
for it. Yes.
What makes you say you're not good at it? What do you categorize as good or not good?
Yeah. Well, and see, that's a problematic question, right? Because I'm just assigning. I'm doing the thing that you just said you're not supposed to do.
Well, we all do it. So that's important to realize.
It's hard to
It's the way our brain works.
It's hard to quiet my mind. I have a lot of masculine energy. That's how I was raised. A lot of my angels are men. And so there's very much like I need to be doing something. And honestly, I think one of the things that trips me up is that I don't know how to do meditation the right way. And again, that's me assigning and assuming that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. But I get in my head about that and I'm like, I hear people who have meditative experiences and they have these visions and they learn, like they get these incredible spiritual downloads. And I totally believe that that's a thing. And I just don't know how to do it. And so I get intimidated and I get in my head I think it prevents me from getting to that place of stillness.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so normal to feel that way.
Yeah.
I've heard that so many times. So I think that's the first thing to recognize is it's so normal for our brains to think there's a right way to do something.
Yeah.
or for our brains to have these expectations. And if we're not
Mm.
meeting the expectations, then something's wrong. If we're
Mm-hmm.
not doing it right, we don't
Right.
understand it, there must be something wrong
And
with it.
logically, I know that that's not true,
Yeah,
but but I still pretend that it is when I'm trying to meditate.
right. Yeah. So one of the biggest misconceptions about meditation is that it's all about clearing out your mind. It's just not. So
Mm.
the sooner you can drop that expectation and that belief, um, the more you'll enjoy it,
Mm.
really. 'Cause it's just not about clearing out your mind. Um, I say in my classes, our brains are wired to secrete thoughts. That's just what they do. Just like our tear ducts secrete tears and our salivary glands secrete saliva and our sweat glands secrete sweat. That's what our brain is meant to do. It's meant to secrete thoughts, right? That's literally what it's wired to do. So if we can remove um, that thought about thoughts, that this is that brain, you're doing this wrong.
Right.
Not supposed to be thinking right now, right? But just realizing that's what okay, brain, you're just doing what you're wired to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. So instead of, willing your brain to stop doing what it's meant to do, it's more about just being curious about what arises.
Mm.
And an anchor is a really important aspect of meditation. So for somebody who's new to meditation, an anchor is something that keeps you here. So
Mm.
if you think about a boat has an anchor, right? That you drop the anchor down and it will keep that boat in that relative area, right? So an anchor, the most common anchor is the breath. You could also use sound as an anchor. You could also use, your body, being in your body as an anchor. You could use a mantra, a phrase, or a word that's meaningful to you. You could use your big toe as an anchor if you wanted to. Just something that when your mind does wander, you just lovingly bring it back to that anchor again and again, as many times as you need to. So it's like a child in a candy store at Disneyland, your brain is like, oh, what about this? Oh, and that, and this, and that, and our brains just do that because that's what they're wired to do. So noticing that is a moment of celebration, like, oh, I'm aware. I was just aware of what my brain is doing. That's the first
Mm.
step, is just awareness. So,
Mm.
okay, celebrate that. I just noticed that my brain was going off. Just lovingly bring it back to that
Mm.
anchor. Because really what mindfulness is awareness,
Mm.
right? Which if you think about it, we are born knowing how to be aware. We have these senses that help us to be aware. So sometimes it's just remembering that we're aware, because we get so distracted by life and by our to-do list and by everything that's going on that we kind of forget that we know how to be aware. So part of it is just remembering that you already know how to be aware. So it's just tapping back into that natural birthright that you already have of awareness, and then bringing love and kindness to that awareness. Um, our brains tend to judge, and our brains tend to heap all of the shame and the guilt and the fear on top of those thoughts, right? That just come. So again, it's just noticing. It's awareness of what's happening in your mind and your heart, and bringing love and kindness to it. And just as many times as you need to, just lovingly and gently guiding your awareness back to that anchor again and again and again. There's no goal, like only have to bring yourself back 3 times in a session. No, like as many times as you need to, you do it lovingly. And it's actually really amazing. There's been so many studies about meditation and how it literally changes the way your brain is wired.
Mm-hmm.
It literally changes the physical makeup of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So as you have that dedicated practice of meditation, your brain will start to change physically, and you'll start to notice these changes happening more naturally in your daily life, where something will happen that you normally would have just reacted to, and you notice yourself pausing and being curious, and you're like, wow, it's happening. It's actually starting to merge together, right? That's the
Mm,
goal for this practice, to start merging with your daily life,
yeah.
which it just will happen from practice.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I love what you're talking about just making space to see what comes to you. And I would say that this is a really awesome opportunity for any of us who feel like we struggle with receiving revelation. Because when you do get into that meditative space, and I have experienced this a couple of times, when I try, I feel like God honors whenever I try. Even if it's not with like the massive visionary experience that I would love it to be sometimes. But there's always revelation that comes when I try. And I've had some really awesome opportunities to meditate, and the windows open and the words just come and you start having a conversation with God. And it's a really beautiful thing. So if anyone feels like they struggle with recognizing your revelation, we all get revelation all the time. But recognizing it for what it is, from who it's coming from, meditation is a really awesome opportunity to practice that, I think.
Can I say one thing? And I remembered the thing I wanted to say earlier.
Yes,
I
please
had a
do.
little prayer. If I'm supposed to say this, have it come back to my mind. And it did. And it kind of ties in with what you were just saying, is that a lot of times earlier where we were talking about God and expecting God to be a certain way. And I think a big part of my journey and my prayer, you were saying that we oftentimes project the qualities of our parents onto
Hmm.
what God is. Um, so a big part of my journey and my prayer and my desire has been, please tell me who you are, not who I want you to be, not who I expect you to be, not who I hope you to be, but help me to know who you really are.
Yes.
Because I really feel that in coming to know who you really are, that will help me to come to know who I really am.
Oh, Marianne, I love that. I have that same prayer.
Yeah,
I've asked that. I'm like, please help me know you for you and not just for how I think you are. Like,
right.
I really want to know you as you actually are.
Yeah,
Because they're so
yeah,
much better. Like, they're always so much better. I was talking to someone this morning about this. God is always so much better than our best hopes
yeah.
for how they actually are.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And I think that can be applied also to Revelation.
Mm.
There's a really wonderful book by Adam Miller called Original Grace, and it's really changed the way I look at God in a lot of ways. Um, and Revelation and my prayers. My prayers used to be, I would pray for certain things to happen, or, these desires of my heart. And that book really helped me to realize that God always knows what is needed. And so my prayers have changed to help me to receive what is needed. Help me
Mm.
to receive um, what you know I need,
Mm.
because they know what we need. Sometimes we think we know what we need, and sometimes we might be right, but they always know what we need. And so my
Mm.
prayer has changed to, please help me to receive what is needed today. And I'm always surprised that I can look back and it always happens. And it's not always what I expected to need, but I'm like, wow, it happened again. I got what
Mm.
I needed, and I didn't even realize that I needed that.
Mm.
I think with revelation, in our church culture especially, it's so easy. We hear these amazing stories over the pulpit, and then we think of our own life and we're like, well, that's never happened to me. There must be something wrong with me. Or maybe God isn't even real, because if God was real, then wouldn't God be that way for everyone? Right? So it creates a lot of doubt. Um, So I think it can be so healing and beneficial to change that viewpoint, that God knows us all so individually, that they know individually what we all need. And we're all going to receive what we need. And we probably already are receiving what we need. We're probably just not seeing it.
Mm.
So part of it is just opening your eyes to recognizing that they already are involved. And that's been a big part of my journey with the mother, is um, it hasn't so much been seeking her and finding her. It's been, wow, my eyes are opened and I've been able to see all the ways she's been a part of everything my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not necessarily like once we find her, then she'll start being involved. It's like, no, the hidden part is that we haven't seen it.
Yeah.
the opening of our eyes is that veil lifting is for us to see, wow, she's been there the whole time.
Yeah.
And now I see it. And she's given me exactly what I needed.
Mm. I think that's such a great definition of how things really are, that it's not so much that things are hidden as it is that we are blind. And in our spiritual development, in our journey, ideally, we're allowing God to anoint our eyes and give us new sight. And we start to see things that were there all along and we just didn't know it. I think it was Adam Miller who defined that idea of God providing for us what we need as the judgment of God. I might be wrong on that. I was talking to someone about this, and we were talking about how judgment, usually when we hear that, we think of it the way that we judge, right? Like, oh, you did something bad and therefore this is your consequence, or you're not as good as this and therefore, you get this result. And another way of thinking about it that I think resonates more with this kind of character of God that we're talking about, and particularly the masculine side, right? But particularly father's side of being the judgment of God, is not so much as he's going to be the bad cop and he's going to come down and say, you messed up and therefore you have this, as it is that he will be the judge of what is needed. Of, okay, you're making these kinds of decisions right now. You wanted to learn these lessons. Therefore, this is what we need to introduce into the story to help you make the choices that you want to, so that you can learn the way that you want to. And that's a totally different view of God and the character, even of the Father, than I think what a lot of us have been raised with. But I think it is incredibly powerful. And when you see God that way, it jives a lot better with Heavenly Mother as the embodiment of mercy, right? They're much closer and they're more intertwined when they're operating that way, of him saying, okay, here's something that we might want to introduce, and her informing that and saying, okay, well, we need to make sure that we have coverage for the hurt that this may cause or the pain that it might cause, that we have, and that's why Christ and the atonement, is the work that he did was so feminine. In providing for that mercy. And he is a beautiful reflection of his mother. I think the fact that he was immaculately conceived by a woman should tell us something about his connection to God the Mother. We always talk about him as the Son of God the Father, and he is that, certainly. It's been an interesting experience for me to go through and read the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, where it seems so clear that he testified that he was a son of the Mother. And it makes you look at him differently to see how they're intertwined. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. First of all, oh, that book is just amazing. I have it on my nightstand all the time. My daughter borrowed it to read it and I missed it. I'm like, can you bring that back to me? I love just reading little bits of it because it's so amazing.
Mm.
But yeah, it brings me back to this balance, and you're right. He does talk about, Adam Miller talks about this judgment or justice and mercy, right? The balance between the two. And so I feel like Christ is an embodiment of that balance. Christ being the perfect son, and perfect in Hebrew means complete, right? So Christ being the complete son, of course he would include his mother. I think this is part of the struggle, because when people get up and just testify of the Father, it's true. And of course it's true. God's plan for us, God loves us, God wants us to return to him. That's all true, right? But it's not a fullness of truth. It's not a complete truth. It would be just like me talking about my experience growing up in my family and only talking about my father. I could talk about him all day and say wonderful things, and they would all be true. And I would still feel good feelings and love, but it wouldn't be complete. It wouldn't be a fullness of the truth. And so there's no doubt in my mind that Christ, part of his ministry was bringing this fullness of truth. And I think part of our journey is not only bringing in that fullness and that balance, but also finding that balance within ourselves. Because I think Christ was the perfect example of that balance of the masculine and the feminine within himself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That was a fun journey for me. I mentioned that my book, Consider Yourself as Eve, it felt more like it was just written and I was just the hand that typed it out. um, and it, I talk about Heavenly Mother at the very beginning and the very end, and she's not really a massive focus in the middle. She's kind of sprinkled throughout. The middle is more about our personal journeys, our spiritual journeys of development, the pattern of the temple, applying the pattern of the temple in our everyday life, and experiencing the actual transformation that the temple symbolically teaches us about. And it was really cool for me to get to the end of the book and realize that in laying it out the way that God did, I don't take any credit for this. In laying it out, it did end up being about Heavenly Mother, but it was about Heavenly Mother in each of us, and how when we lean into that pattern of spiritual development, we reveal her inside of us, and who we are in coming to know ourselves. Joseph Smith has this great quote that if a man does not understand himself, he can't understand God. And it's exactly the same way for us as women. If we don't understand ourselves, we don't understand the fullness of God, as you were talking about, because God is not just a single man. That was a different person's pattern, someone that we don't want to be following, hopefully.
And I
So
would say for men too, that it's not just for
yes,
women. The journey for men to find
totally.
also is to find that balance within themselves.
Absolutely. I think that seeing God as a husband with a wife is hopefully revolutionary for how we think about and worship God. This was something that I was talking to my husband about yesterday. I was talking about, or a couple of days ago, we were talking about Jesus Christ and the idea of him being married to Mary Magdalene and how we never talk about that. And when it is brought up, a lot of people are like, oh, that's just trivial. It doesn't matter, blah, blah, blah. It would have been, we would have known more, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's anything but trivial. And I was asking him, I'm like, what would it be like for men to see Jesus Christ as a man who was a husband, who had sexual urges, and how he would have dealt with that, how he would have remained faithful to his wife, how he would have navigated the experience of having a male body the way that men do. And I think that it is a travesty that we don't talk about that at all. And I think that it would be incredibly beneficial for all of us, men and women, to look at Jesus Christ that way, to look at Mary Magdalene that way, and to see them as reflections of our heavenly parents, and to realize, like, oh, I have something that I can aspire to. They understand me on this level of intimacy, and our interpersonal relationships, our marriages, our sexuality. Like, they understand that intimately, and they can help us. They can help us overcome our trauma and our addiction and all of these different things. Anyway, that was a mini soapbox, but I think it's really sad that we only look at one side of God, and it means we get their character wrong if we're only looking at one or the other.
Yeah, I think it brings suffering, really. I think it
Mhm.
does. When you don't have a fullness of truth, it's leaving a big gaping hole, and that big gaping hole causes suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's crucial for so many aspects
Yeah.
of our growth and our understanding and our coming home to ourselves and understanding ourselves.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, Marianne, I would love to recommend your book again. This is Walk in Wisdom's Paths, Thoughts and Poems Written to Uphold Our Divine Mother. I had a couple in here that I really loved. You have one about her fruit and about Jesus Christ being her fruit that she prepares, which again, we talked about a little bit, just how obvious it seems in some of these apocryphal accounts that he was truly the son of his mother, and how important it is to see him that way. I love the one that you did on cosmic birth, the imagery of Heavenly Mother as a weaver who weaves together the cosmos and our intelligences and light. That's something that women do. We weave together flesh and sinew and bone and blood and spirit in our wombs. And that's a reflection of her. I was wondering though if you might read the very last poem that you have in your book, The Ascent. I think that it sums up a lot of the things that we've been talking about in just a really beautiful way. And I'd love to hear your voice and how you read it as the author.
Okay, thank you. This poem means a lot to me, and I actually had the book written and it was already being published and in the process of being published without this poem. And then, because the first poem in the book is about finding balance, right? Hanging in the balance. And then the last poem was resting in balance. So I felt like, oh, those are nice bookends for this
Yes.
book. We have a beginning and an end. And so in my mind, it was done. And then I went on this trip to England and wrote this on a bus ride in England after we had visited amazing places, chapels and cathedrals, and just really, I felt so inspired by this idea of the feminine being this still center. And so that's kind of what inspired this poem. And like I said, this journey for me, it started as an external journey and is still ongoing as realizing that she is within.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always wonderful to me to hear other people express that same thing, because I have now heard so many people express that. And so it's so heartwarming and wonderful and makes me so happy to hear that people understand this and have felt this as well. Okay, so thank you. I'd love to read it. It's called The Ascent. You call to me from the still center, bidding me to climb, to venture upward. I try, but this burden weighing me down. As I shed my skin again and again, I am lighter, quickened. I ascend. Each crest brings further light and truth, bringing me closer to that timeless point, that true north, where all is woven and swaddled in the silken threads of love. The winds come, harshly whispering, "Who are you to climb? The way is far too steep. You will fall. You will fall." I am deaf to the cries of this counterfeit wind. I press onward, upward. I climb through the darkest night and the brightest morning. At last, I reach the top. A quick intake of breath as I look around. I know this place. I recognize these walls, the familiar patterns and shapes tenderly engraved by your hand. At last, I see your face. You are here? You have always been here? How did I not recognize? I have arrived at last in the sacred space where you have always been, within the sanctuary of my own heart.
Thank you. I read that, and that last line just hits so strong. It's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful truth. And, as we've been talking about Heavenly Mother, we see these themes of what the feminine is and who she is. And she is an internal entity. She is inside each of us. The masculine is that external, right? It's those things outside of us. And we'll find her there too, in each other, in our sisters, in our mothers, our friends, in the other women that we have the opportunity to associate with. We'll see external evidence of her. But it helps to see it first in ourselves and to realize that she does dwell within us, that we are her daughters, that many of us have come here to help reestablish her and help the world see who she is, and to have that complete image and understanding of the character of God that is a divine sealed couple, a man and a woman, that we worship. We worship both of them in and through their son, Jesus Christ, who is the perfect embodiment of them both. Marianne, thank you so much. Marianne and I both will be speaking at a conference that she is hosting called Walking with Wisdom. This will be held in Eagle, Idaho. What's the date for me?
October 19th.
Okay, October 19th. We will share the registration link. So if anyone is in the area and would love to come, it'll be a wonderful evening. Mandy Green will be there. Dave Butler will be there, along with both of us and MacArthur Krishna, who will have on a podcast soon as well. So definitely come. I think it'll be a wonderful, uplifting evening. And I'm honored to be speaking there. Marianne and I were both saying, like, I don't think we deserve to be with some of the names that are listed. But we're honored all the same, and we'll add our drops that we can to the ocean that is flooding the world with our beautiful mother. Marianne, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your beautiful wisdom with us today.
Oh, thank you, Megan. She's my favorite thing to talk about. So this was a lot of fun for me.